After that night, a single chair remained empty forever. The women who had used it never spoke about the pain that lingered. Whatever shifted there never returned. That wasn't the first thing that disappeared. A plain memo slid under the door, stamped with a routine number. It wasn't a request, it was a reassignment. Other names had already been crossed off. Hours to comply, refusal accounted for. A ledger note hinted at the consequence, but it ended mid-sentence. No one explained why some names vanished before the rest. She stepped inside. The door shut with a muted click, but it resonated longer than expected. The floor was cold under her shoes. Each step echoed unevenly. Light leaked from a single high bulb, but shadows clung to corners, refusing to retreat. Air carried a faint metallic scent, faint yet unmistakable. It clung to her skin, raising goosebumps despite the warmth of the room. Every chair was placed with precision, yet none faced the same way. It felt like order, but not the kind she knew. She realized she had no clue where to look first, yet every glance felt watched. Lines on the floor were drawn faintly, as if the room had once demanded alignment. She noticed subtle smudges where others had stepped incorrectly, corrections barely visible. A clock ticked in irregular intervals, skipping beats, creating a rhythm she couldn't anticipate. Every sound seemed to have a consequence. A small ventilation grate rattled softly. The noise made her pause mid-step. She caught herself imagining that movement as a signal, though no one confirmed it. No instructions were given. Nothing was written. She wasn't sure which gesture would provoke notice, which silence would be tolerated. The rules were invisible, yet she could feel them pressing against her chest. Every face she passed slid away from her gaze. Eyes darted, then lowered. Conversations ended abruptly when she approached. One woman's hands trembled while she adjusted her uniform, but her eyes never betrayed the reason. Another shuffled papers that had no purpose, just to keep her eyes busy. Movement became a language she didn't understand. The more she watched, the more anxious she became, and yet, looking away felt like admitting guilt. A distant metallic hum came and went, intermittent, as if punctuating moments she was not allowed to witness. She began counting subtle gestures, realizing that each micro-movement had weight, yet no one acknowledged her noticing. Time slowed. Every breath seemed amplified. The hum of distant machinery became a heartbeat she could not escape. Footsteps in another room punctuated the silence, yet the echo felt deliberate, almost choreographed. She noticed the tiniest sounds: a chair scrape, paper shuffling, the quiet hiss of pipes. Voices that once filled similar spaces were absent. Where there should have been chatter, there was only waiting, suspended, thick, almost physical. She realized silence had weight. It pressed against her temples, then her shoulders. It was louder than any shout could have been. The absence of sound felt intentional, as if the room itself was observing. Her mind wanted answers. She tried to trace the reason for the order, the absence, the pattern. Each thought felt exposed. A pen rolled across the floor. She bent instinctively to retrieve it. The room paused with her movement. A faint rustle in response, almost too subtle to detect. She realized even small questions, even curiosity, were visible. The act of wondering itself carried weight, noticed in the stillness. Every shift of posture, every glance around the room seemed recorded. She could feel the room reacting, adjusting to her very thoughts. She understood fully in this space. Being seen wasn't the same as being safe. The first change was small. The hum of the fluorescent lights flickered, then paused for a moment that stretched too long. No one mentioned it. A chair that had always squeaked in a familiar rhythm now sat completely silent. She caught herself waiting for the noise. It never came. Shifts that had previously started with a soft bell now began in silence. One by one, routines unraveled, almost imperceptibly. Paper clips were missing. Files shifted position on the shelves. She glanced at the order of things, realizing she could no longer trust what she remembered. Every sound, a cough, a whisper, the scrape of boots became sharper, more jarring against the void left by the missing patterns. One sound stopped, and she couldn't tell if it would return. Small gestures were missing. A glance that used to pass between colleagues no longer occurred. The space felt thinner, almost empty. She began noticing the rhythm of movement, but the rhythm no longer matched expectations. Even the air seemed heavier. A clock ticked offbeat. She tried to align herself with it, but the seconds skipped unevenly, as if the room had a heartbeat of its own. Something about the timing was wrong, but no one said a word. Files that had been stacked neatly the day before were subtly misaligned. A single ledger showed a blank line where her name should have been. She blinked, then the line reappeared. It felt like a pattern was breaking around her, small, deliberate, almost cruel. Yet no one confirmed it. Her mind tried to grasp causality, but each attempt dissolved into doubt. The rules had changed, without announcement. Time now moved differently. Hours stretched like taffy, blurring into one another. She watched others follow routines automatically, their eyes distant, hands precise. The repetition became hypnotic, yet nothing felt normal. Names were called, but no response followed. Shifts blurred together. Lunches happened, yet plates were left untouched. Paper records were incomplete. Entries disappeared or changed overnight. Files she had read were gone, replaced by blank pages or new handwriting she didn't recognize. She noticed absences, who wasn't there, more than presences. One missing figure created a void larger than any room. Small events were misremembered. The human mind tried to fill gaps, but each memory seemed overwritten by the space itself. Absence began to weigh heavier than presence. Shifts passed in a haze of light and shadow. She felt movement around her without understanding its source. The faint shuffle of papers, the tap of shoes, the soft sighs of colleagues, all compounded a sense of wrongness. The air became thick with expectation, yet nothing arrived. She realized she had started measuring time not by hours, but by small, silent cues, a door that opened too late, a footstep that stopped abruptly, the absence of a familiar noise. The smallest missing detail spoke louder than any explanation. A single look caught her, not direct but lingering. A colleague paused mid-step, glancing toward her and then quickly away. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet she felt the weight of it. A rule she had assumed was fixed. Where to stand, what to pick up, when to write now seemed adjustable, as if someone had quietly shifted it while she wasn't watching. The room responded to micro-movements. A slight tilt of her head, a breath held too long, a hand raised in thought, all noticed. Her own behavior began to feel artificial. She wondered if she was performing correctly, or if her mistakes would be silently catalogued. Paperwork was subtly altered, a line erased, a box ticked that shouldn't have been. Nothing was announced, nothing explained. This had crossed a line, but the line was invisible. Small incidents accumulated into a pervasive dread. A pen dropped. The sound echoed longer than expected. A file shifted on the table, its contents unreadable. A chair was moved slightly, then returned. The sequence felt intentional. No one confirmed anything. Every movement now carried a hidden weight. Every glance might be interpreted. She felt trapped in observation, unable to act without consequence. The room was alive with absence and intent, and she was fully inside it. Everything had changed, except the silence. She returned to the schedule. One line was missing, not blank but removed as if it had never existed. She scanned the ledger. Other shifts were present, names intact except for hers. A small chill rose in her neck. She realized the absence wasn't random, it was deliberate. The pen she had used the day before was gone, even from her desk. Its position had been recorded differently. Even her handwriting had vanished from the page. Records no longer aligned with her recollection. Tasks she remembered performing were missing. A fellow worker glanced over the same ledger and shrugged. No comment, no acknowledgement. She checked another sheet. Someone else's entry overlapped hers. The order of things had subtly shifted. Her mind tried to reconstruct the events, but the memory and the paper no longer matched. Memory said one thing, records said another. Protocols had quietly altered. Forms she had filled in exactly as instructed now had extra boxes, ticks that weren't there before. She noticed a stamp on a sheet she hadn't used, the same stamp applied somewhere else, out of sequence. Rules she thought rigid were suddenly ambiguous. Actions she remembered taken correctly now appeared wrong, though no one explained why. The weight of being correct had shifted without warning. Even compliance now felt like a risk. Women spoke in generalities. When she tried to ask about missing shifts, glances were exchanged, not fear but habit. Certain events weren't discussed, as if erasure had seeped into memory itself. She realized stories weren't hidden. They were quietly dissolved into routines. Even when names were mentioned, details were absent. She could feel the silence pressing against her understanding. The more she asked, the less anyone answered. Every change had a stamp, a note or a line, nothing handwritten, nothing emotional. It was all procedural, sterile, exact. She touched a document. The paper felt ordinary, but she knew something important had been removed. No apology, no acknowledgement, no indication that anyone noticed her confusion. The system moved on silently, perfectly. Her own actions were erased from collective memory. Tasks she had completed were attributed elsewhere. Forms she had filled in exactly had disappeared entirely. Objects shifted, a book moved, a chair replaced, a pen gone, not randomly, precisely. Even the shadows seemed rearranged to make her feel smaller, less important. If she hadn't remembered, it would have never existed. She noticed that every time she looked up, someone or something responded. Not with words, not with explanation, just subtle adjustments. A name crossed off the list, a page slightly rotated, a step paused somewhere she had walked. Every action she thought was private was catalogued in silence. Presence didn't matter, only what was recorded. Weeks had passed. She felt the tension in her shoulders, in her hands, in her gaze. The effects of missing records weren't immediate, they accumulated slowly, like frost forming unnoticed. Tasks unacknowledged, actions erased, glances unnoticed, all compounded, creating a slow ache in her mind. She began seeing patterns of erasure everywhere, subtle, invisible, intentional. Disappearance had a rhythm, one only she seemed to notice. Nothing about this was accidental. She could feel the precision in the omissions. A record left incomplete, a rule slightly shifted, a form altered without comment. Women acted normally, yet avoided the empty spaces. It was as if everyone had agreed, this would not be remembered. She wondered if she was alone in noticing the design. The act of erasure was as deliberate as creation. She looked at the room, now quiet, procedural, untouched, yet nothing was the same. Her presence, her memory, her actions, all partially dissolved. The ledger lay flat, papers aligned, nothing appeared out of order. And yet she knew, she had witnessed intentional disappearance. It had been erased, but she remembered everything. The room was quiet, too quiet in a way that made her chest tighten. She could hear her own breathing, the soft scrape of her shoe against the floor, the distant hum of the heating pipes that usually went unnoticed. Everything appeared untouched, chairs aligned, papers stacked neatly, light spilling evenly from the high windows. But she knew better. She had felt the absence of things that should have been there, subtle gaps that pricked at memory. A ledger lay open on a table. She traced her finger along the lines of entries she had filled. One line was gone. Not blank, not crossed out, simply gone. Her gaze drifted to a colleague, whose hands moved automatically, stacking forms, adjusting pens as if nothing had shifted. But she knew there was a rhythm, a subtle difference in movement, a slight hesitation when names were read aloud. She exhaled slowly, realizing that while the system had moved on, she had not. The weight of memory rested solely on her shoulders. The system moved on, but she stayed. The hum of the room seemed to stretch time. Even the clock ticked differently, seconds slower, pauses longer. Every small noise, a chair scrape, the faint rustle of paper felt amplified, carrying intent. A shadow lingered in the corner, unmoving, yet somehow watching. She felt the room's gaze, not accusatory but deliberate, as if it catalogued every micro-movement. She observed her colleagues in silence. Every action precise, every movement deliberate. A faint nod here, a slight adjustment there. They were performing, maintaining appearances, adhering to rules she could no longer see but could feel. No one spoke about the missing shifts, the erased names, the vanished tasks. It was as if those absences were not only unnoticed, they were irrelevant. And yet, she felt their weight, pressing against her perception. Every sip of water, every glance at a clock, every shuffle of papers, all were laden with invisible meaning. She began cataloging them silently. A pen tap, a pause mid-step, the faint tilt of a head. The absence of acknowledgement created a pressure she could not escape. Every movement seemed to speak, but to no one. Her own presence felt like an intrusion, as if observing alone was enough to disrupt something delicate. She realized that attention itself had weight here. Noticing too much might shift the balance, or perhaps she already had. The rules of the space were invisible but omnipresent. She could sense them in the pauses between words, in the timing of actions, in the way shadows fell. Every subtle reaction, a flick of an eye, a footstep halting midair, the faint pause before someone answered a question, communicated boundaries she could not cross. Her moral tension grew quietly. She knew something had happened. She had witnessed disappearance, erasure, subtle corrections in behavior and memory, but there was no confirmation, no discussion, no guidance, only the weight of invisible lines she dared not cross. Silence can carry more judgment than words. She became hyper-aware of herself. Her posture, her breathing, the tilt of her head, every micro-movement felt observed, interpreted, catalogued. Even small gestures, like adjusting a sleeve or picking up a pen, seemed to ripple through the space in imperceptible ways. She wondered if she was the only one noticing, or if everyone else had learned to ignore the shifts, the erasures, the subtle manipulations. She focused on the human behavior around her rather than the system itself. The system was neutral. The weight was in how people responded. Obedience quieted discomfort. Silence dissolved tension into routine. Subtle erasure became natural. She watched her colleagues act as if everything were normal. Yet each small adjustment, each invisible acknowledgement carried hidden consequence. One woman straightened a paper, another adjusted a chair, yet their actions felt loaded, signaling events that could not be discussed aloud. Even routine gestures were heavy with meaning. Her own behavior mirrored this, subconsciously adjusting, testing limits, feeling the silent feedback of the environment. The moral lies not in history, but in routine. She felt the weight of observation. Not judgment, not accusation, but a quiet reckoning with what humans tolerate, what they erase, and what they quietly enforce upon one another.